kind of a two-part thing, but they're both interdependent. Srila Prabhupada's mood and his mission were, it's not that he had a mood of his devotional service which was separate from his mission to spread Krishna consciousness. It was actually one and the same. That his internal mood, his deep realization and his deep connection, his deep attachment to chanting the holy name and to serving Krishna was non-different and was interdependent with his desire to spread Lord Chaitanya's movement to every town and village and fulfill the prophecy of Lord Chaitanya, the predictions of his own spiritual masters, etc. So this book kind of expands upon some of the ideas, what it means to be a follower of Srila Prabhupada, and what it means to really imbibe the culture, the knowledge, and the execution of what Prabhupada was trying to accomplish here in this world. So there's many different subject matters. The book opens up with a very extensive section just kind of explaining what this is and what we're trying to do when we're approaching this book, approaching this knowledge. And one of the statements that you'll read early on in this book, this is just volume 1 of 3. No, it's okay, bro. But it's a very big book. And one thing which I kind of chuckled at in the beginning of the very beginning of the book, he writes that this is just a very brief overview of many different topics, and actually what needs to be done is devotees need to dive in deeply to each one of these topics and produce more literature specifically about these. And I kind of chuckled thinking, how can this possibly be a brief overview? But as I started reading it, I started realizing, yeah, actually, that each and every one of these topics, he gives a few quotes of Srila Prabhupada, maybe a few anecdotes from other devotees, from other Vaishnava literatures, books by Srila Prabhupada's disciples, etc. And then he might give some of his own commentation. But and we all also experience, these issues come up a lot. Oh, I think that's in the Mood and Mission. We'll pull it up, we'll read through it, and it'll just kind of be a few quotes, a few instructions about it. And it's not really like fully ironed out, so to speak. It's just kind of bringing some of the, airing out some of the different concepts, the problems, the philosophical understanding. So many things might be there. Airing them out, opening them up for more discussion is ultimately kind of the goal of this book. Laying down a premise of what are the most important aspects that we as followers of Srila Prabhupada should be focusing on in our own spiritual life. Clearly delineating those things, setting our priorities straight, and then ultimately trying to point us in the right direction of how to pursue that, how to imbibe Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission. So yeah, like I said, there are many different topics. Maharaj is known for speaking strongly. I just read last night, I felt inspired to read the preface of this book, on speaking strongly in Srila Prabhupada's service, where he was unabashedly and not regretfully saying that he has a reputation of speaking very forcefully, and he does not apologize for it. And no matter what people might say, according to his understanding, after studying Srila Prabhupada's books and serving in the movement for as long as he has, he's come to the conclusion that the most effective way of presenting Krishna consciousness and of serving Srila Prabhupada is by presenting the philosophy of Krishna, Bhagavad Gita, and of Lord Chaitanya very clearly, very straightforwardly, and not compromising for anything. Which means that if we want to follow in the mood and mission of Srila Prabhupada, first of all, we should have a proper understanding of what that is, Therefore, in the first part of this book, there's a very big section on hermeneutics and epistemology, basically understanding, first of all, what are we talking about, and the language that we might use as devotees, the way that we derive knowledge and how we apply the knowledge from the scriptures, because we see in the activities of Srila Prabhupada that he applied scriptural injunctions very differently than some of his own predecessors did, actually, introducing revolutionary things for which he was criticized, like the commingling of his male and female disciples in a lot of ways, like giving Brahmin Diksha to Westerners, sannyas to 24-year-old boys who just joined a couple years ago, etc. So first of all, understanding exactly how we as Vaishnavas and how we as followers of Lord Chaitanya are meant to actually apply the scriptural knowledge. Because Srila Prabhupada was very, obviously, he gave the most importance, you could argue, he gave the most importance to his books. And what are his books? His presentation of the scriptures, Vedic literatures. So in many, many ways, more often than not, Srila Prabhupada emphasized the very strict following of the Vedic literatures, but so did the Smarta Brahmanas, so did the Mayavadis, so did some Hindu or whatever. So how do we apply these teachings of the scriptures in such a way that's favorable for spreading the Krishna consciousness movement? That's kind of the premise. What is Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission? Because at the end of the day, we're meant to accept what's favorable and reject what's unfavorable. Even when it comes down to rules and regulations, as followers of Lord Chaitanya, we understand the goal is to serve Krishna with spontaneous devotion, disregarding any kind of external rules and regulations. And that was what Prabhupada wanted to bestow upon the world, giving them pure love of Godhead, but in a very systematic way, recognizing our current position and understanding how we can be uplifted from Tamo Rajogun. He prayed like this when he first arrived to America in the Boston Harbor. Upon first seeing the condition of the American people, and he prayed to Krishna and Markandeya Bhagavat Dharma that these people are very much in the modes of passion and ignorance. I don't see how they will be able to understand the highest mellows of devotional service. He didn't see how it was going to work. But he said, Krishna, you're the most expert mystic, and it's your desire that this knowledge is spread. So, and I have full faith that by the power of chanting the holy name and by presenting the teachings of the Srimad Bhagavatam, this will be able to penetrate their hearts and fulfill your words, fulfill my own purpose in life. Srila Prabhupada prayed like this. He said, let it be known the real purport of this name that has been given to me, Bhaktivedanta. I don't have any bhakti and I don't have any Veda. I don't have knowledge or devotion. But you can use me as you like, as your servant. And of course, that's actually Bhaktivedanta. Of course, Prabhupada had knowledge and devotion, and that's why he was qualified. So, Srila Prabhupada's presentation of Krishna consciousness was highly revolutionary. It's said that an acharya is one who exemplifies by his own activities the proper way that we perform Krishna consciousness, but also one aspect that separates just a regular guru or a regular devotee. Of course, not any devotee is just regular, but a rank and file Vaishnava with an acharya, especially of the caliber of Srila Prabhupada, is that they make a special contribution to the parampara. Generally, this is done with literature, like the six Goswamis, very famous for producing different Vaishnava literatures. And that's generally considered what a sannyasi is supposed to do, make a literary contribution to the parampara. And specifically for an acharya, they for the specific time, place, and circumstance, they revolutionize the preaching of Krishna consciousness in such a way that sets the tenor for the future spreading of the movement. And in this way, the Krishna consciousness movement is gradually evolving into what will become the golden age of revival of God consciousness in this world for 10,000 years. So coming right at the onset of that golden age, Srila Prabhupada wrote his transcendental books, which he said will be the law books for the next 10,000 years. This is discussed in this book. What does this mean that Prabhupada writes the law books for the next 10,000 years? Because Prabhupada doesn't, these aren't law books, actually. If you study law, and you study Srila Prabhupada's books, you'll see that these aren't exactly books that we can use as to govern nations, to set rules and standards in society. There are a lot of things, and especially in the first canto, ideas of how to govern society, but this is meant to be understood that the principles presented in Srila Prabhupada's books are those principles by which we should mold our spiritual lives for the next 10,000 years, which gives impetus to production of many more books, like law books, that are literally used to govern nations on the basis of Krishna conscious ideas. Anyways, so the Srila Prabhupada's major contribution to the Krishna consciousness movement was presenting the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and of Lord Krishna in the English language, which was an order given to him by his spiritual master from the very first day that he met him, when he was just a young man. And then after a life of preparation for fulfilling that mission, he finally took the opportunity to first of all publish several books, the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, most importantly, before embarking on his mission to spread the Krishna consciousness movement in the West. And then, of course, thereafter, he published, I think they say, over 70 volumes of transcendental literature, because they used to print them differently back then. But so much transcendental literature translated into the English language for the presentation of the traditional, as it is, philosophy of Krishna consciousness. But in order to establish that in the Western world, he had to break the mold, so to speak. He had to do something new and revolutionary. And this doesn't mean that he neglected the basic principles of Krishna consciousness, but he made so many adjustments in the presentation and the delivery, and even in the practice itself of Krishna consciousness, which changed very significantly the Krishna consciousness movement altogether. So much so that his own godbrothers and, of course, other, not even Vaishnavas, but Brahmanas and Indian Hindus in general, criticized him heavily because of this. And now, of course, they're praising him for doing these things. But at the time, like I said, Brahmin Diksha for Westerners, sannyas initiation, free mixing of women, etc. These things were highly, and even crossing the ocean and presenting this philosophy to mlechas who were not necessarily qualified to receive such knowledge, and adulterating the message of the Shastra by putting it into this mlecha bhasha, English language, which, one should become educated to study the Sanskrit before they can be qualified to study Shastra. Some people have this idea. But Prabhupada understood the mood and mission of his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. He understood the mission of his spiritual master. And like this, the parampara goes on with the acharyas fully understanding and imbibing the mood and mission of their spiritual master. So if we see it through that lens, we can understand that Srila Prabhupada's adjustments of applying the principles of Krishna consciousness and presenting them in revolutionary ways were not only completely coherent with the same ideals as his own spiritual master, but was the real true application of the teachings of his spiritual master. He it is an objective fact that Srila Prabhupada was the most prominent disciple of his spiritual master, and who really took on his mission in the most pleasing way, in the most accurate way, even though apparently he did things which were not allowed, even in the Gaudiya Mat. But his spiritual master also was known for this, where Gaura Kishore Das Babaji told Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, what is it, 2 rules, 3 rules? Three. One of them, never go to Maya Brahmanda. What was that? Kolkata. The world of Maya, the universe of Maya. Never go to Kolkata, never associate with worldly people, and never initiate any disciples. And of course, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta was famous for starting the Gaudiya Mat there in Kolkata, bringing in high dignitaries like members of parliament and famous worldly people for preaching, and of course accepting so many disciples and opening 60-something temples, 64 temples all over, and amassing a lot of followers. But of course, he understood the heart of his spiritual master. He understood his mood and his mission. So he said, I never went to Kolkata. I went to the Gaudiya Mat, and this is not different from Vaikuntha. I never associated with any worldly men. I gave them my association by preaching to them the message of Bhagavatam. And I never accepted any disciples, because I consider all of my so-called disciples, I consider myself to be their servant. So this is the real mood of Acharya, who is able to extract the essence of the instructions of his spiritual master and apply them in such a way that it is favorable for the spreading of the Krishna consciousness movement, which is the goal of followers of Lord Chaitanya. Of course, we can understand that the goal of the followers of Lord Chaitanya is to become completely free from all material contamination, to reinstate oneself as a servant of Lord Krishna and Golok, Vrindavan, and whatever rasa he might have. And yes, that's also there. But specifically as followers of Lord Chaitanya, we see that even those eternally liberated souls who are already there serving Krishna in the spiritual world, they themselves come down to be followers of Lord Chaitanya for the purpose of spreading the Krishna consciousness movement. The gopis themselves are appearing in this material world to write and distribute transcendental literature. So how can we understand how exalted of a service it is to us assist our spiritual masters in spreading the Krishna consciousness movement in this world? We ourselves are recipients of that mercy, but we can very quickly be elevated to the platform of becoming administrators of that same mercy in the form of distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. So there's also a lot of instructions, a lot of anecdotes that we can derive from this book, kind of extracting why did Prabhupada want to open temples if the Yuga Dharma is chanting Hare Krishna congregationally? Why did he establish such rigid deity worship? Why did he give mundane designations like Varna and Ashrama? Why did he emphasize that so much whenever clearly in the conversations with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Ramananda Rai, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said, okay, that's fine, but there's something more than that. Why did Srila Prabhupada emphasize so many rules and regulations? Why did he emphasize the cultural aspect of Krishna consciousness, introducing Indian culture, Hindu culture to the Western world? Of course, we can understand that it was all for the purpose of spreading the Krishna consciousness movement, all for the purpose of spreading this knowledge, the teachings of Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which in the introduction of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the book, Prabhupada writes that the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the teachings of Lord Krishna are actually the same exact teachings. But Lord Chaitanya came to reestablish what the Vaishnavas missed whenever Lord Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita. Came to show us practically how to apply those teachings. So all of the different aspects of the Krishna consciousness movement. It's said that one astrologer he claimed that Srila Prabhupada would build a house in which the whole world can live. So just recently we saw this video. I never really thought about it too much, but the Krishna consciousness movement is meant to be a house in which the whole world can live, and that house can't just have one room. Houses don't have one room. Even in this tiny apartment, we have how many rooms? 3 or 4 rooms. So there are many rooms. There are many departments in the Krishna consciousness movement. You have the kitchen, you have the deity worship, you have the bathroom cleaners, and the scholars and the artists. You have the Sankirtan devotees, and all of these different departments are meant to facilitate everyone, conditioned souls, to come back to perform the Yuga Dharma Sankirtan Yajna. And of course, the Srila Prabhupada taught us that the most effective way that we perform this Yuga Dharma is by distributing this transcendental knowledge. This is a perfect kirtan, is distributing the knowledge of Krishna consciousness. And we are not as expert as Srila Prabhupada in presenting the philosophy. We have so many shortcomings. So instead of going out with a megaphone like the Christians on the college campuses and telling everyone they're going to go to hell, we can just simply introduce them to Srila Prabhupada. And like this, it's a perfect and complete method of performing the Yuga Dharma of Sankirtan, congregationally chanting the holy names of the Lord by distributing this knowledge. And of course, all other aspects and all other departments in the Krishna consciousness movement are meant to assist this prime goal of spreading this knowledge, spreading the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So yeah, it's a really amazing book. I'm also currently reading it, so I can't say that I've read it or imbibed any of it.
How much did you read?
Well, I've read the whole thing because I was given the service of proofreading, but I didn't read it in the order that it's been printed in. I was given sections at a time that were out of order. So I'm going through and systematic. I'm like almost done with the second volume right now. And it's actually just incredible. Every single time I read it, I'm like, this is the best part. And then the next time I read it, I'm like, oh no, this is the best part. It just keeps getting better and better. But yeah, I'm not saying this because I'm a disciple of His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, but I genuinely think that this is an essential book for serious members of the Krishna consciousness movement to read and try to understand. I really do. And especially those who are serious about giving their life in the preaching service of Srila Prabhupada. I think that this is an essential book. And for those given the responsibility of guiding others to engage in service in the movement, it's it's all encompassing. You can get all of this information by your independent study of Prabhupada's books, by study of other books, by scrolling through the database and reading so many Back to Godhead magazines and watching Prabhupada memories, and you can do that, but you don't have to. Maharaj has spent, I think he says, all in all, this book has been he's been working on this for like 25 years or something like that, maybe longer. And it's really impressive. Everything is cited. He doesn't make a single statement in this book without giving some kind of citation. He doesn't make a single statement, some kind of opinion. It's also criticized sometimes of having a very conservative opinion and things like that. But you look, he gives all of the references. This is when Prabhupada says like this, and Prabhupada also said like that. He'll give both sides of the story. talking about free mixing between genders, for instance. Some statements of Prabhupada is that, oh, there's no harm. These boys and girls, they're raised like this, so this is how we should do it. And then other statements, Prabhupada said, no, there should be very strict separation. So both sides are presented. It's up to us to use our intelligence to apply those properly and not become rascals and try to use Prabhupada's instructions to assist our sense gratification. So it's a reference book in a lot of ways. You don't necessarily have to read it systematically through from the beginning to the end. In the third volume, there's an index, which is pretty in-depth. You don't have to get it, but it's okay. So that index is for all of the volumes. So if you have a question, what did Prabhupada say about wearing karmi clothes? Go to, I think we had a little bit of trouble finding it, but you can find in the index and you can read a small section what Prabhupada's statements are on whatever topic it might be. So it's good to have in the temple. It's good to have locked away in your head. And it's a good book to distribute to devotees. So I think, I think that's okay. Is that okay? Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And does anybody have any questions, comments that they'd like to make?
Well, I have a question about this. You are saying speaking straight in the service of Srila Prabhupada. So we have Prabhupada disciples who are very liberal minded, and we have Prabhupada disciples who are very conservative.
Mm-hmm.
So they are both disciples of Prabhupada. So they have different levels of freedom and liberality and conservativeness. So how do we understand this? We see so much spectrum. I think this is one of the reasons.
Yeah, Maharaj discusses this early in the book. How is it that Srila Prabhupada is among all other acharyas in the past, we have the most amount of knowledge recorded with video, audio, and literature of Srila Prabhupada's teachings? How is it that there's such a broad spectrum of understanding what Prabhupada really wanted? How is that so? I think that anybody that does a serious study in the Srila Prabhupada's teachings would see that compared to the most raw, traditional Vedic culture, Srila Prabhupada was extremely liberal. And he even told this to Allen Ginsberg early on, that Swamiji, he said, Swamiji, you won't have any followers because you're too strict, you're too conservative. And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, I'm very liberal, and he told devotees at one point that if I told you everything, all the rules and regulations, you would faint, So Prabhupada was giving a very liberal presentation of Krishna consciousness in many, many ways. But in other ways, especially on social issues, we see that Prabhupada was, you could say, leading conservatively, but I think anybody with common sense would, instead of putting it as some kind of polar thing, they would see that there's a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things. And if we dissolve this conception of, and we convince ourselves that there's no such thing as wrong and right, and it's ultimately up to like everyone to decide, then that's a society of godlessness. That's completely atheistic to have such an idea. There is the truth. There is untruth. There is light. There is dark. These things do exist. There will always be people who are very loose, especially in terms of following some of the finer instructions of Srila Prabhupada in culture and social issues and things like that. And I think not I think, but it seems that by the institution of Varnashram Dharma, it'll facilitate all walks of life to practice Krishna consciousness to whatever extent they're willing to surrender to. Yeah. In the meantime, I mean, the for better or for worse, the Krishna consciousness movement is in its current state, which I don't think many devotees are satisfied with. And in the meantime, I think it's important to, instead of dwelling on controversial points that have happened in the past, we should create a culture among young devotees of really making an endeavor to try to understand Prabhupada and apply his teachings in the best way. Not that devotees in the past didn't do that, but they didn't have anybody, they didn't have any reference point to go off of. They didn't have senior devotees to guide them. They didn't have all these mistakes that were made to learn from. So we have that, and we have the opportunity to move forward. Yeah, I have a lot of capable devotees in the movement now, that are able to help us. Yes.
About this point of conservatism, I'd like to comment that it's a very liberal state of affairs in the world today, pretty much everywhere. And to be conservative is not at all popular anywhere, almost. So I think that Prabhupada often uses this phrase, be strict and serious. It's very special. Likes to point that out. Be strict and serious. So I think that the approach that I understood that Prabhupada showed is we should act strict and serious and maintain conservative principles, actually, for the goal of becoming very liberal. The goal is very liberal. We want to be like madmen, tasting the nectar of the mellows of pure devotion. That's what we want. That's there's like no restrictions on that level, right? But if it's like niyamagraha. If we forget that that's what we're aiming for, and we're just trying to go for establishing some kind of like smarta culture, then I think we lose the point. But I think that both has to be there. Therefore, Prabhupada gave us Chaitanya Charitamrita, nectar of devotion. That's part of the core. The core like study we're supposed to make is that we're not just focusing on like the tattvas and the rules and everything, but we also want to discover. Our goal should be to discover what that's all about. And yeah, just some thoughts. You mentioned that practice, Prabhupada presented in his presentation of Krishna consciousness was quite revolutionary. That he took. And you also mentioned that he made some changes to the practice. I was wondering what you had in mind with that.
Yeah, there's a pretty extensive section on Prabhupada's adjustment in the number of rounds that were required to chant, because it's a pretty big shift in what was required previous to that.
64?
Generally, it's understood in general, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would require 64 rounds to be chanted every day. It seems like there are some exceptions to that. But in general, in the whole culture of the Gaudiya Math, it was understood that devotees were meant to chant 64 rounds. And early on in the Krishna consciousness movement in ISKCON, there was no rigid morning there was no temple programs. Prabhupada didn't emphasize these things until later on, actually. A lot of these things, a lot of the adjustments that we see that Prabhupada made in introducing Krishna consciousness to the Western world, we can see that Prabhupada would start to tighten down on them as the movement went on. So we can understand that some of these things, many of these things aren't necessarily meant to be eternal principles that, for instance, if a new guy comes and says, I'm chanting 4 rounds every day, we'd be like, great, that's amazing. But then if Kotakarna Prabhu came out and said, I'm chanting 4 rounds every day, we'd be like, that's horrible, so kind of like that, we're meant to kind of make advancement in Krishna consciousness, and as a movement, it seems like Prabhupada wanted that gradually the culture would become more traditional. He was less tolerant of facilitating the Western mentality as the time went on. And even it seems that his mood and mission would change at some times. Like in the beginning, his idea was to preach to the intellectual class, and very early on, he realized that that wasn't going to work, and he completely switched gears and focused on something else. So yeah, there are some aspects of Prabhupada's mood and mission which we can just understand. This is an eternal principle, and this is, there are some that we can see that it was not necessarily that he wasn't preaching the absolute truth, that it is some kind of material things that he's giving, but yeah, we do see that he expected there to be some kind of evolution of the Krishna consciousness movement as time went on.
Of the movement, like, or the individuals who are growing within the movement? Because I was under the stand, I don't know what's mentioned in the book, but the way he designed the like daily program, it should always be like that. I don't know, is that meant to also kind of evolve?
It's hard to say, because he also designed different programs at different temples. The Guru Puja was introduced at one place. He didn't say that it had to be done at every temple until devotees started spreading that, hey, we're doing this Guru Puja everywhere. And then they asked Prabhupada if they can institute it everywhere. And he said, yeah, you can do it everywhere. Same with worshipping Tulsi Maharani. He didn't institute that. Devotees approached him and asked if they can do it. Worshipping Tulsi Maharani means like how we do, singing the song and doing the arati. So things like that. And there's even temples now, you go to Simhachalam in Germany, their darshan arati, they play a different song. Prabhupada wanted that one song to be, but they do something different. I don't see any problem with it. Because it's a Nrsimha temple, they play some Nrsimha song.
So then the impression I get from explaining is that the way it's done, like the standard everywhere, it's for like facilitating the general, like attracting and training up the general people who come. But for those who are like long-term dedicated, like preachers should definitely maintain that to show the example.
Yeah.
But many people aren't preachers, and perhaps there's space for them to create their own kind of program.
Yeah.
Not like speculative program, but
yeah, and in a traditional culture, I mean, Prabhupada wanted every home to become a temple of Krishna. That doesn't mean that he wanted every home to have a rigid temple program and a Bhagavatam class and everything like that. Those would be kind of done in the central temple, which was being maintained by Brahmanas. The residents are brahmacharis and renunciants, and then they kind of set the standard of this is like really like the how you're supposed to do everything, and then how those living outside do it on their own, if they do it on their own. In a lot of cases, they would live outside and they would serve at the temple only. But and Prabhupada, in some cases, wanted that grihasthas living at home, they don't worship deities, they don't have their own like temple thing. They would become fully invested in serving at their local temple. And other times, he wanted that every single grihastha would have their own kind of temple, preaching center, etc.
So then it looks like a case of like, well, you choose what you like.
You follow what your guru tells you to do, and it's different. The guru tells different things to different disciples.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, a lot of the teachings that we get from Srila Prabhupada are in his letters. Interestingly enough, Prabhupada specifically did not want all of his letters to be published, and they are. So a lot of the teachings that we get from his letters, this is in the hermeneutics part of this book, understanding which of Prabhupada's teachings take precedence over others. First of all, you have his books, 100% there. Second of all, his classes. Third, his letters. Fourth, his conversations with devotees. Fifth, his conversations with non-devotees. All of these, this is kind of like the hierarchy. Generally speaking, we try to go by what's in Prabhupada's books. Sometimes there's details that are only mentioned in letters and conversations, so we can kind of try to understand like that. But even then, Prabhupada's instructions on different matters varied according to time, place, circumstance, the different devotees involved, which is why we ourselves ultimately have to take the guidance of our spiritual master and not just independently, Prabhupada wanted, I don't know, whatever it might be. Yeah. But it takes common sense. Ultimately, a lot of what I'm getting from this book is that this is a presentation of what Prabhupada wanted, and it's pretty clear to some extent. But at the end of the day, it really just takes some common sense. It takes a brain to really apply what Prabhupada was teaching us. It takes a brain, which means that it takes some sincerity. Like I mentioned, it's not that we can take Prabhupada's teachings and use them to assist our own sense gratification, because he said so many different things. We can try to pick and choose those different. This is the half hymn logic that we only want the parts of Prabhupada's teachings that assist what we want to do in Krishna consciousness, which generally means sense gratification. We can find a lot of things that will assist us in sense gratification, but this is rascaldom. Okay, anything else?
Can you quickly say what means preaching is the essence?
There's a section on it. Yeah, it's a pretty big section on each of those, of the 4 principles that are in that aphorism or whatever. Preaching is the essence means that every aspect of the Krishna consciousness movement is ultimately underlying the preaching mission. The cook, he's thinking, I'm cooking for Krishna. I want to cook nicely so that Krishna blesses this prasadam, so that the devotees are nourished and inspired to go out and preach. The pujari is worshiping the deities, thinking, I want to serve these deities so nicely that they are so pleased that anybody and everybody that walks in this temple gets blessed, that they have inspiration to go out and spread this movement to become serious devotees. The one cleaning the bathroom, everybody is ultimately meant to have this preaching spirit. Not everyone's going to be able physically, emotionally, mentally, they're not going to be able to be on the front lines distributing books or doing Harinam or whatever it might be. But everybody in the Krishna conscious movement is supposed to be a preacher. That's what that section talks about, and that's what that means. Preaching is the essence. It's the essence of Krishna consciousness movement. It means that the essence means that you might not always see it as the most apparent thing, but if you extract it, if you have the vision, you can see that essence. Like the swan, even from water, you can extract the milk from that. So yeah, seeing everything in connection with ultimately spreading the Krishna consciousness movement. And yeah.
Brings up another question. Spreading and churning.
Yeah, there's another section. Boiling the milk. There was one point where a lot of devotees had joined, and Prabhupada became kind of disturbed getting the reports of the GBC members that not all the standards were being followed, but lots of books were going out, and many devotees were being made. So how do we understand this, Prabhupada? And he said, okay, there needs to be more emphasis on boiling the milk, which means helping devotees, training up devotees, studying his books very seriously, focusing more on the spiritual health of the members of the society rather than so much outreach. But we see that during the same period, book distribution continued to soar, and Srila Prabhupada expressed extreme delight seeing that and kept pushing more and more for more and more book distribution. It seems that churning the milk or boiling the milk doesn't necessarily mean stopping all kinds of outreach activities. In fact, arguably speaking, the best engagement to really boil the milk and to really kind of help devotees come to higher stages is by serious execution of Sankirtan Yajna. And that's part of boiling the milk, getting devotees really inspired to distribute books, to study the books, developing a culture of a healthy, proper culture and distributing books and of studying the books. And it's also boiling the milk. and naturally you might attract so many other people while doing that. There is a section in here if you want to read further about that. This keeps happening. Like every time we talk about different things, I'm like, there's a section in mood and mission. So yeah, there's so much there. I really, yeah, I'm very grateful you gave me an opportunity to speak about it, and I hope I didn't say anything that was wrong. And, thank
It
you.
was great, Prabhu. It was Vishal Prabhu's idea.
Oh, okay.
Request you to speak on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Do I have to do anything here? Somebody just did this. Like it's an emoji. Okay. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yes.